Hi class, this is Sir Alex Basco and welcome to General Biology 2. Today we are starting a new lesson, Lesson 5. We are starting with Lesson 5.1, all about the evolutionary school of thought. When we say evolutionary school of thought, basically what we mean is the different theories, principles, and studies that helped us understand evolution today. So lesson 5 is all about the evolution of life, which is basically a continuation from our understanding of the origin of life, which we studied in lesson 4. Previously, we learned how of the principles and theories that we believe have resulted in the start or the origin of life. Today, what we're going to do is to understand how from the moment that finally life is started on Earth, that life evolved from basically a simple organism to a much more complex organism such as humans. So at the end of today's lesson, and basically at the end of lesson 5, what I want everyone to be able to do is first for you to be able to explain the mechanisms that produce change in populations from generation to generation. Basically understand the process that contributed or influenced the change in population. And in evolution, change is necessary. Otherwise, we cannot evolve. Our ancestors are quite different from how we are today. And also, this is not only true for humans, but a lot of species or animal species as well. Next is for you to be able to show the patterns of descent with modification from common ancestors to produce the organismal diversity observed today. What that basically means is for you to kind of like see the pattern on how these changes or what the pattern of these changes. So for example, you may not know, but the shrimp that we eat and the crabs that we eat are actually related to the spiders that, sometimes if you don't like or fear spiders, they're actually quite related. Basically, the shrimps and the crabs are the insects of the ocean, and we quite eat them. And some of us might be allergic, but a lot of us enjoy them. But we do not eat the spiders. Well, at least some populations in the world do eat spiders, but basically they're actually related to each other because they have a common ancestor wherein their species broke off. Some stay on the ocean or stay in the bodies of water, while some start to go onto the land, which, the spiders that we have today. So for you to be able to see some of these modifications and identify the common ancestors. So that's basically the second goal that I want everyone to be able to do at lesson 5. Also, trace the development of evolutionary thought. Like I've mentioned, today this is the main focus of our lesson 5.1 is to understand the various principles of evolutionary thought, meaning understanding the various studies, investigations, and hypotheses and theories that a lot of our scientists have managed to come up in order to explain the evolution of life. And lastly, be able to explain some of the evidence of evolution. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and go straight to our discussion of evolution by first understanding a little bit of overview with the evolution of life. So one thing that is very important to understand is that the discussion on evolution of life that we have today, the knowledge that we have today, is basically a coagulated or basically a combination, that's a better term, a combination of various studies, discussion, investigation made by various scientists. And it's not only, a very short years, but it includes decades of studies. So years and years of studies, discussion, investigation. And because of these studies, continuous discussion, and continued investigation, until today we are trying to understand the evolution of life. And similarly, in understanding the origin of life, it's quite difficult for us to study this because one, it's happened a long time ago, and we do not know the conditions that resulted in this evolution. So just understand that We are understanding or basically studying these principles in theories in order for us to give us an understanding the diversity of life that we have today. And whether you believe in creation theory, which is mostly the belief in theology, in God creating the universe, and in Adam and Eve, etc., all that story, or whether you do not believe that and believe in evolution theory more, it's actually not, I would say it's not something that is bad, because at the end of the day, they are both answers to the question of the evolution of life. Yeah? It's just one of the answers, which is the creation. Theory of creation is metaphysical. It's a belief in something that we cannot measure. It is a measure of faith. Do you believe it? It's something that science would not be able to deal with, because metaphysical means it's outside the physical, and science can only measure things that is in the physical world. Science is a study of things that are empirical, or meaning for us to be able to observe, be able to measure. And religion, or the things that we believe in religion, are something that we cannot actually, measure in terms of SI units or centimeters, meters, etc. But it's something that you measure by your faith. So you can both believe in creation and evolution theory. You can measure those two. They are not actually contradicting, because first, they do not overlap in what they believe in. So whether you believe creation or evolution, it's up to you. They're both answers to the same question. So having said that, I hope you guys, especially if you are sticking with the creation, at least be open-minded in understanding that some of the things that we discussed today is scientific, and it falls under the category of physical, or things that we can measure ourselves and observe. So let's go ahead and begin our discussion of the evolution of life by the study conducted, or the theory at least conducted or proposed by Lamarck. So it's called the Lamarck's theory of adaptation. So this theory of adaptation by Lamarck is proposed by Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck. That's his full name. He's a French scientist, wherein he is the first one to actually know the concept of inheritance. So our understanding of inheritance then is not as broad as we do now. Right now we can study DNA and everything, but back then it's actually quite difficult to understand. It's actually quite to realize that some things can be inherited. A lot of the things that people believed back then in the 17th and 18th century is that people are constant. They do not change. What we were before, or what we are today, and what we will be tomorrow is unchanging. But according to Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck, in his theory of adaptation, is that there are some characteristics that have developed by our parents or ancestors that actually have been passed on to their offspring and into the next generation. This is his picture, by the way, and one of the things that he noted is there's a picture in your module is the giraffe. So he believed that at the beginning the giraffes do not really have a long neck, but the longer the neck, it helped them eat more food, and as time goes by, that characteristics of having longer neck, being more effective in eating, is being passed down and passed down and passed down into their generation until after a certain time, giraffes now has very long necks. So that's what Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck believed in. It's a very basic concept of inheritance, but it's there. And a lot of people did not believe him, except for actually Charles Darwin's grandfather. He's actually one of the people that believed and supported Lamarck's theory, which is ironic, or I wouldn't say which is amazing, because what we believe now, or what we know on evolution, is credited heavily on Charles Darwin and his theory of natural selection. Perhaps Lamarck's theory and his grandfather's belief in Lamarck's theory influence. This is just one thing that I'm thinking. It probably influenced Charles Darwin, although we do not know if that is true. But in the end, Charles Darwin is heavily credited in what we understand now for the evolution theory. But I want you guys to know that it was John Baptist de Lamarck who first gave us the idea that perhaps humans are evolving, perhaps we are not constant, perhaps we are changing. And this is further supported by, as you can see now, Charles Darwin in his theory of evolution, which became popular in the 19th century, years after Charles Darwin died. Because when Charles Darwin released his study, especially his book, which later you will see, not a lot of people actually believe him at first. Same thing with Lamarck's theory. Not a lot of people believe him, and they thought you are silly. That's impossible. But as you can see, they proved those critics wrong and showed that what they were actually trying to theorize and trying to share is actually you can say, the truth of the matter. So Charles Darwin and natural selection. So how it began? Well, Charles Darwin, here is his picture, was actually invited to an expedition around the world, and the expedition is called the HMS Beagle. So that is basically the name of the ship that they used to travel around the world. And within the next 5 years, Darwin traveled around the world. And a lot of his study, or in this expedition, he was given an opportunity because he was actually invited as their, I believe the term was the naturalist, or the person in charge of understanding the nature around them. And he used that time to study various animals and various faunas and floras during that expedition, especially around the time they were at the south border or the coastline of South America, and the most influential area is the Galapagos Island, wherein he noted a lot of the modifications and changes that animals have, and how the islands of the Galapagos Islands are quite different from the other animals in the main continent of South America. So here is the route that they have. I will enlarge this later. I will show you the route that they take while they were in the HMS Beagle. But as Darwin kept studying these modifications, or these evolutions that he is seeing in the animals of South America and Galapagos Island, he was able to come up with his theory of natural selection after reading Malthus' essay about human population. In Malthus' essays, he discussed about how human population will keep growing and eventually will surpass the rate of food production. So since the rate of human population growth is bigger than the rate of food production, according to Malthus, there would come a time wherein human will not have enough food and will have to start fighting for food. And who is the strongest, the fittest, and able to gather and win over these food, or these food, will be the one to only survive. So based on that essay, Charles Darwin have created his own theory of natural selection, wherein various characteristics that are present in animals that help them survive will last longer than those animals with characteristics that do not help them survive. Later we'll discuss more on natural selection, but let's go back on to Charles Darwin's route as he traveled around the world. So basically, he started here at Plymouth in December 1831, and within the next 5 years, he traveled, starting from the Madeira Islands, the Canary Islands, but a lot of his studies in animals are conducted in South America. So he saw a lot of the species of animals as he roamed around South America, and especially around this area of the Galapagos Island. So that's what solidifies his theory of natural selection. And then he moved to Pacific Ocean, to French Polynesia, and to French Polynesia, Oceania, going back here to Australia, and then go back to basically Europe. So that's the route that they've taken. But a lot of the influence that he saw in his study is around this area, South America and the Galapagos Island. But let's go ahead and now understand what is natural selection. So natural selection is basically the process through which populations of living organisms adapt and change. Let's remove the end here. What do we mean by that? Well, organisms have various characteristics that they have developed and possess. So these, we can call this as variations. And these variations in species increases the organism's ability to compete, survive, and reproduce. And when they were able to reproduce, these same variations, these same characteristics are passed on to their progeny, or to their sons and daughters, to their offsprings, or to their descendants. That's what progeny is. So there's a situation very common. It's called the peppered moth. So at the start of right here. So at the start, there's a species of moth. So there's a species of moth that when they lay eggs, they can sometimes have a variation wherein, aside from laying white moth, there are some moth that are a little bit darker on the that are on the darker side. There's a variation of color. There's a brown. So what happens at the beginning is that there are more light colored moth than there were dark color moth or brown moth. And what happens is that there happen to be a predator around. So if you introduce a predator, for example, these birds right here, and as you can see, the white moth cannot camouflage, cannot hide themselves on the bark of the trees wherein they find their food or wherein they find their shelter. So what happens, they become prey to a lot of predators, and specifically these birds right here. So what happened in the end, because there's a competition and predation happening, there are more white moths, and specifically there's a predator that eats white moth, not the brown moth, because first they cannot see the brown moth because they were covered, they were being camouflaged. But the white moth are not as easily able to camouflage themselves. So what happens, they were being eaten. And what happens is the variation of the brown, because of their variations, because of that characteristics of being brown, it increased their ability to survive. And increasing the ability to survive also increases their chance to reproduce. So what happened in the end is there are more now brown moth than there were white moth in the end, because the white moth starts to get eaten. So a lot of you can think of it, a lot of the genes that contributed to the white moth, to the variations of white moth, it starts to dwindle. It starts to go lower and lower and lower until there's such a time that only the brown moth mostly are surviving, which contain the variation for brown color, which they can then pass on to their progeny or to their descendants. So that's what natural selection is all about. Because there's a misnomer for natural selection. A lot of the people think when you think about natural selection or Darwin's theory is the stronger you are, the more you are likely to survive. Survival of the fittest. But what I want you to understand is survival of the fittest does not mean you are, the stronger you are, the more you are going to survive. It's not only that. It's having characteristics or having variations that will help you survive. So example, in war, in times, I hope we are not going in war, but imagine we are in a medieval era wherein we are, a long time ago, we are in a situation where we always go to war. Being strong, help you survive. So that will help you survive, help you compete, and help you reproduce. But in the end, if you think about it, there's also such a thing wherein because you are bigger, you are stronger, you're always put in front of the war, in front of the battle. And that kind of like decreases your ability to survive. So a lot of the people that probably are much stronger than, which were placed in front of, the army, they die off easily. So you can think of it that way as well. So sometimes, in order for you to survive, perhaps you do not need to be bigger. You do not always need to be the stronger. Because one of the reason that mammals survive while the dinosaurs died, if we believe in the comet theory, which wiped the dinosaurs off the face of the earth, the reason that animals survive is because back then animals are the mammals specifically are much smaller than the predatorial dinosaurs. So the dinosaurs roam the earth, they are predators to smaller animals, specifically mammals. So what happened, the smaller the mammal is, the more likely they are going to survive. And one of the ways that they can survive is by burrowing themselves into the land. So they are living underground, they are living under trees, under caves, under rocks. So what happens when the comet hit the earth, which wiped off the dinosaurs, the mammals are protected because they were not on the surface of the earth. They are on underground. It's one of the things that helps mammals survive. So in the end, after all the dinosaurs died, there were no more big predators. So what happened? The mammals starts to reproduce. They start to become bigger because there's more food around. They can roam freely around now. So that's a natural selection. Being stronger, being bigger does not necessarily mean you are going to survive. The mammals in those situations, they are smaller, they are much weaker, they burrow themselves under trees so they don't get eaten by dinosaurs, survive. And that's what helps them to have mammals that we have very big mammals now. So again, I hope you understand what natural selection is. It's not just being stronger and being bigger. It's having characteristics, whether being small or being bigger, that helps you survive. Okay, so that's what natural selection is all about. So after Darwin has discovered or created or solidified his theory, he actually published his theory in a book called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, and he released it in 1859. This is the cover of the book that Darwin published, and like I've mentioned, not a lot of people believed him when he released this book. It took decades before the scientific community actually finally accepted the theory of evolution. So based on Lamarck's experience and Darwin's experience, that not a lot of people starts to believe them first, I want to encourage everyone that perhaps in the beginning you believe in something, and not a lot of people believe in that belief. They doubt you, but I hope you take inspiration from Lamarck and from Darwin that someday perhaps you will prove them wrong. So if you have goals and aspirations, keep believing in those goals and aspirations, because when you finally found those people who will believe in you and you finally succeed, that's much eventually you will reap what you are sowing. So take inspiration that even Darwin was very, very prominent nowadays. It took him decades before people starts to believe in what he is believing. Okay, so that's a little combination of our lesson, a little bit of encouragement for you guys. So let's continue on. So we studied Lamarck and we studied Charles Darwin and his natural selection. Let's continue on with more theories. The next one is by Alfred Russel Wallace. And Alfred Russel Wallace is the father of biogeography. But what is biogeography? Well, Alfred Russel Wallace is actually a prominent believer of Charles Darwin. He believed on what Charles Darwin thought. But he also contributed or expanded on Charles' theory by emphasizing that not in natural selection, the geography has an influence on it. So Russel Wallace had his own expedition. I don't have a picture of him, but there's a picture on your module. He had this expedition on his own, wherein he meticulously recorded a lot of the various species and when they, how do they look like, what are their characteristics, and identify where they are located. And eventually, he noticed that a lot of the common traits that they have, a lot of their shared traits, for example, this neck right here and this neck right here, And these are both camel, right? But they're found on different location. One is found in Asia and one is found on Africa. As you can see, the ones that are in Asia has more hump, and the ones in Africa in this particular area has less hump. But they're both camels, so there's a difference in their evolution. There's a difference in their variations. And he noted a lot of these changes or modifications or differences is noted because of the physical barriers. So perhaps it is a mountain range. There is one separating them in the mountain range, and perhaps it's just a river. You can think of it, there's a river, one whole river that is separated into two locations. One area has let's say, has calmer water, while the other area of that same river has a rapid torrents, stronger flow of a river. And if you note, the same species of fishes, same species of fish, in the calmer waters, they're smaller fish because they do not need to wheel their tail faster, so they have to survive in the current, in the torrent, in the heavy current of the ocean or of the river. But on the other side of the river, you will probably note that some of the fish has bigger tails, has bigger fins, and much bigger because they have to, flap their tails, and their fins is stronger so that they do not get swept off by the current, by the strong current. So because of those physical barriers, because of those a little bit of changes, it influences what a lot of the animals actually look like. So I hope you understand what Alfred Wallace was teaching. It's basically there's an influence of the species in where they are found and where they are situated. Okay, so that's biogeography. And lastly, what settled, okay, before we talk about Gregor Mendel, so a lot of these theories by Lamarck, by Darwin, and by Alfred Russel at this point is that a lot of people do not yet believe them. A lot of people are trying to find ways to prove their theories. It is not until we discovered, or I think the better term is rediscovered, Gregor Mendel's study, that we finally found the key to that, the key to prove Charles Darwin's theory. And Gregor Mendel is basically the father of genetics. It is because he conducted various experiments on pea plants, and because of these experiments, he noted how a lot of the characteristics from the parents can be passed on to the offspring. And because of Gregor Mendel's study for long years, for many years, he studied thousands of pea plants. He discovered how a lot of the characteristics, different colors of the peas, different size of the peas, different shape, different colors of their flowers. He had a basic understanding and study of genetics. And because of Gregor Mendel's study on pea plants, it finally settled the doubt on Charles Darwin theory on natural selection, that were in the surviving parents that has the characteristics or variations that help them survive were being passed on to their kids. So if you go back to the moth example, the brown moth has the variations or has the genes that contain that brown pigment. And since they are surviving more than the white moth counterpart, that increases their survivability. And because it increases their survivability, that brown variation genes are being passed on to their offspring. So in the end, you have a larger population of brown moth. So a lot of people, again, do not believe that at first, but when Gregor Mendel's study was finally uncovered and rediscovered, it gave the evidence to Darwin's natural selection. And that is the time that Darwin's natural selection finally became really, really popular. So Gregor Mendel and Charles Darwin are actually not related. They're two different people. But I also said Gregor Mendel rediscovery of his discovery of inheritance is because when Gregor Mendel was actually doing his study and experimentation on the pea plants, not a lot of people knows about his studies. Even after publishing his studies, not a lot of people, have seen it. It is only after his death that when people look at his studies that they finally made the connection with Charles Darwin's theory and voila, Gregor Mendel's theory. He didn't even see. I believe, I already believe he died even before a lot of people knew about his experiments. So again, this is I hope influence you and understand that perhaps what you are doing or goals and aspirations may not be realized early on, but keep doing them anyway. So at least there's one thing that I want you to learn is one is about this evolutionary school of thought, and the next one is for you guys to keep working on what you believe in. Okay, so that is basically the school of thought of evolution. This is how we come to learn about the evolutionary, about the theories of evolution. We're going to continue on our discussion on evolution on our next lesson. But I hope it's clear what happened. And if you guys have any question, do not hesitate to message me. Thank you so much, and may you guys have a great day.